Hello my dear friends, how are you? My name is Ari Theriger and today I'm going to talk about Holmgang. Given the latest video about Viking justice and certain punishments and ways of settling disputes during the Viking Age, I thought perhaps it would be interesting to explore a bit more on Holmgang. Reputation meant everything during the Viking Age. The Nordic peoples had come from a long tradition of values deeply rooted in the sense of justice and fairness. To have a good reputation, a person had to be known as being an honorable person. Insulting someone's honor was reason enough to challenge them to a duel. So Holmgang was introduced, and it was one of the best ways to settle disputes and to prove one's valor if anyone dared to question one's honor. I hope you enjoy this video. Before we talk about Holmgang, it's important that you know why this method to settle dispute was introduced. Throughout Scandinavian history, especially during the late Iron Age and during the Viking Age, it was marked by many internal conflicts. It was hard to maintain peace within the communities, and there were many conflicts between families, which led to endless blood feuds for generations that would eventually lead to the death of people yet still to be born. These internal conflicts weakened the communities and the economy, and at a certain point it was absolutely exhausting for everyone that was caught in these conflicts and family feuds. Some families had been fighting for ages, and the reason had been quite forgotten. At a certain point it was just a sense of rivalry for unknown reasons. A lot of people died, and the lack of able bodies needed to make a community thrive made the community weak. A weak community was an easy target for other communities who wanted to increase their wealth. So it was necessary to put an end to the internal bloodshed. People were just making it easy for outside enemies while they were brutally destroying themselves from within. So trial by combat was introduced. To be more precise, duels. Everything would be settled in single combat. Einvigi was introduced. Einvigi was a duel with no rules, no laws and no moderators. It was a duel to the death, and you would give everything you had to kill your opponent. The choices of weapons were random. I mean, no rules whatsoever. You could even use your bare hands. In these duels, it was certain that at least one person would die, maybe even both, due to internal bleeding, very nasty wounds, etc. But upon a person's death, the survivor was the winner. But by law, this wasn't considered murder, because it was a duel. But it was still a killing, so it was considered manslaughter. The winner would have to pay an amount to compensate the family of the victim. They would have to pay the worth of the person, Wergild, man price, and then the matter was considered settled. Einvigi, meaning single combat, was a way to settle disputes to prevent the self-destructive chaos of endless feuds, raids and retaliation that weakened communities and eventually led to their destruction. But no one really won in Einvigi. The loser would be dead and the winner would either be dying for a long period in anguish, or if the person managed to survive, it had to pay a considerable amount to the family of the victim and end up losing wealth. But Einvigi didn't really prevent retaliation at a certain point. It just created wishes of revenge. So Holmgang was introduced. The legal way to settle disputes or to defend your honor would be with Holmgang, or Holmganga in Old Norse. It was a duel with a set of rules and laws dictated by the local thing, the assembly, and it had moderators and witnesses. Although people could get killed in Holmgang. It wasn't a duel strictly to the death, but accidents happen. In this case, by killing a person, no amount was needed to compensate the family for the loss of one of its members, unless, of course, you did it on purpose. That's what the moderators and witnesses were there for, to determine fair play. In the end, if both are alive, the loser had to pay a ransom to the victor. The first thing that would happen before the actual fight began, both fighters would agree on how much the loser had to pay. Then they would move on to where the duel would take place. In most occasions, communities had specific areas for ritual combat. Could be a sacred space like a grove or an ancient megalithic construction, some place considered sacred. Could even be a small highland, hence the name of Holmgang, which means highland going, most likely because the origins of ritual combat were in sacred small highlands. After the terms were set and the place, the actual duel would begin somewhere between 3 and 7 days after the challenge had been given. The challenger would recite the agreed terms so everyone could hear, and after this there was no turning back. Refusing was considered lack of honor. Then it was time to construct the arena, the surface where the duel would take place, often with cloaks or animal hides, covering more or less 6 square meters. Some rules highly depended on the location, the country, and the local assembly. The point was to create a symbolic island to avoid having to literally go into an island for a duel. The quicker the dispute was settled, the better for everyone. And as you might have guessed, if any of the fighters stepped outside the square, the fighter would automatically lose. There were some religious rites during this performance. For instance, the staves that marked the corners of the arena were hazel staves, and there was probably a religious connotation behind the choice of these staves. The point of religious rites was to prevent any use of magic by the fighters. These rituals to prevent magic had to be done because the fight had to be fair for both sides. So there was clearly a certain level of spiritual protection around Holmgang. We know that in Norway, when the actual fight began, the fighters would, just fight. But in Iceland, or at least according to the Icelandic laws in terms of duels, the fighters would take turns to strike at each other. One would attack while the other would defend, and then the roles were inverted. Sword and shield was used. Icelandic duels might have lasted for a very long time, good for the audience to have some entertainment while drinking and making their bets. Now, here's something interesting in Holmgang. You could call for backup. Each fighter was accompanied by a shield bearer who would do just that, carry extra shields, often 2, to replace the broken shields of their partner. But this person could actively intervene with shield only to protect his partner. So the tactic was to try to break the opponent's sword or somehow turn the game to his own favor with the help of the shield, giving a chance to his partner to strike. On the other hand, fighters would often try to break the shields of their opponents precisely to take the shield bearer out of the fight and then concentrate on taking down their opponent. Because Holmgang was introduced to avoid blood feuds, unnecessary killings, etc., the fight would be over as soon as first blood literally stained the cloak. Whoever bled first would be the loser. But here's another interesting thing. Nowadays, in our modern religious reconstructions of Nordic paganism, the general view on Odin, is that he is the all-father king of the gods, a very benevolent figure. I've been saying this in many videos. Odin was a death god and was considered as such for centuries. Holmgang is the proof of that. During the Viking Age, Odin was still a death deity and not the All-Father portrayed by Icelandic medieval poets. Because there was no actual death in Holmgang after a fight, Hudin had to be appeased. Fighting without death was simply something Hudin would not approve, so a bull would be slaughtered after the fight came to an end to appease Odin, the god of death, because somehow after a ritual fight an offering of blood and life had to be given to Odin, because the gods were called upon as witnesses as well to watch the duels. The thing is, to the Norse, combat was also highly religious. When a person entered in combat, it was either to take a life or to die. Blood had to be spilled and a life had to be taken, and that would be the only way to enter Valhalla by Viking Age religious standards. So, no deaths after a fight in Holmgang. Death had to be provided somehow as an offering to Odin. Also, the gods were witnesses in these duels because Holmgang was not just to settle disputes, but to deliver justice. But justice isn't always on the right side in duels. It highly depends on one's skills in combat, or even a lucky move, or even depended on the shield bearer. So the belief was that the gods favored the righteous. And so the outcome of a duel was seen as justice delivered because the gods clearly stood on the side of the victor. Right, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video and tack för idag.